The house on the hill had a name, but no one used it anymore. The Duke of Ashworth had left it 8 years ago, and in 8 years the ivy had climbed the north wall, the fountain had cracked, and the windows had grown dim with dust. The stable roof sagged, the garden had gone wild. The bell over the front door was gone, taken by a storm 3 winters back, and no one had replaced it. The house sat on the hill like a man with his back turned to the world, and the world had learned to turn its back in return. The Duke came home on a grey Tuesday in early spring. His name was Calamache, and he was 34 years old, and he had not spoken the word home out loud in 8 years. He rode alone. His man had gone ahead by carriage with the trunks. Callum wanted the last mile on horseback, wanted the cold on his face, wanted to hear the mud suck at the hooves and the wind push through the bare oaks. He wanted the arrival to feel like something he had chosen. The road bent, and the house came into view. He stopped the horse. For a long moment he did not move. The wind pulled at the collar of his greatcoat. Somewhere behind him, a crow called once. He looked at the house, and the house looked back at him, and neither said anything. Then he touched his heels to the horse and rode down the last slope. The gates were open. They had been open, he suspected, for a long time. He passed through them and up the long drive, and the gravel was patchy under the hooves, choked in places with weeds. The lime trees on either side were older than he remembered. The branches met overhead and made a dim green tunnel. He rode through it slowly, and the smell of the wet earth came up strong, and the smell of moss on the stone walls, and underneath that, faint but real, the smell of wood smoke. He drew rein at the front steps. A curl of smoke was rising from the chimney. He sat on the horse and stared at it. A house left empty did not have a fire in the grate. He had left instructions with the steward, years ago, that the house was to be shuttered and let alone. He had not sent word that he was coming. The steward himself had died 2 winters ago. Callum knew that much from a letter. There should be no one here. There should be no smoke. He swung down from the horse. His boots hit the gravel with a sound that seemed too loud. He tied the reins to the iron ring beside the steps, and he climbed the steps, and the third one groaned under his weight. The door was not locked. He pushed it open. The hall smelled of wood smoke and something else, something warmer, something like bread. There was a candle burning on the hall table. The floor had been swept, not perfectly, not with the polish of a household in service, but swept. A rag had been dragged across the wainscoting at some point in the last week. He could see the dull streaks where dust had been pushed and not lifted. Someone was living in his house. He stood very still and listened. From somewhere deep in the house, a voice. A woman's voice. Low, speaking softly to someone. Then a child's laugh, quick and small, cut off by a shush. Callum's hand went to the sword at his hip. Then, slowly, he let it drop. He was not going to draw a blade on a woman and a child in his own front hall. He walked down the passage. He walked past rooms whose doors he had not opened in 8 years. He walked past the door to the small parlour where his mother had sat every afternoon of his childhood. He did not look at it. He walked past the door to his father's study, and he did not look at that either. He kept his eyes on the passage ahead of him, and he followed the smell of bread and the sound of the voice, and he came at last to the kitchen. The kitchen door was open a hand's width. He stopped just outside it and looked in. A woman knelt at the hearth. Her back was to him. She was tending the fire with a poker in one hand, and with the other hand she was steadying a loaf of bread on a paddle. Her hair was the colour of wet oak, pinned up loosely, with strands escaping around her ears. Her dress was grey wool, plain, patched at the elbow. She was not tall. She was not small. She was ordinary. In every way a person could be ordinary, and yet Callum stood at the door and did not move for a full 10 seconds, because there was something in the way she moved that did not fit anywhere in his understanding of the day. A child sat on the flagstone floor beside her, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with the same wet oak hair, braided. The child was arranging pebbles in a line. She counted them under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. The woman slid the bread into the oven. She said, without turning, "The horse outside is a good horse. I heard it come up the drive. Whoever you are, you can come in. I'd rather you came in than stood in the passage." Callum did not move for a moment. Then he pushed the door open the rest of the way. The woman turned her head. Her eyes were grey. Not blue-grey, not green-grey, grey like the sky on the day he had left this house 8 years ago. She looked at him across the kitchen, and she did not stand, and she did not flinch, and she did not apologize for being in his house. She said, "Ah." That was all. The child looked up. The child looked at Callum, and then at her mother, and then back at her pebbles. She counted the next one. 5. Callum found his voice. It came out lower than he wanted. "Who are you?" "My name is Vivian Marsh," the woman said. She rose from the hearth, dusting her hands on her apron. "This is my daughter, Rosalind. We have been living in this house since November of last year." "On whose authority?" "On no one's authority." She met his eyes directly. "The house was empty. My child and I had nowhere to go. I did not steal from it. I have not sold anything. I mended the roof over the kitchen last month with my own money. I keep the fire in one chimney only. I do not use the good rooms. Whatever you decide, I will not lie about being here." Callum stared at her. He had come home expecting cold stone and shuttered rooms. He had come home expecting to face his ghosts alone. Instead, there was a woman with dust on her cheek and a child on the floor counting pebbles, and the smell of bread rising through the whole ground floor of the house. He said, "I am the Duke of Ashworth." "I know," she said. "I saw your face on a portrait in the long gallery. I dusted it last week." The child said, 6. Callum did not know what to do with his hands. He put them behind his back. He said, "I would like you to leave." Vivian did not flinch. She said, "When?" "Today. That will be difficult." "Why?" "Because I have nowhere to take her." Vivian nodded at the child on the floor. "The village will not have us. I have tried. There is a reason we came to an empty house on a hill in November instead of anywhere else. If you send us out today, we will sleep in a hedgerow tonight, and it will rain, and she will be ill by Friday. I am not asking for your pity. I am telling you the situation." The fire cracked in the grate. A log settled and sent up a small red shower. Callum said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the child. The child had finished her line of pebbles and was starting a second row underneath the first. She was concentrating very hard. Her tongue stuck out a little at the corner of her mouth. He looked back at Vivienne. He said, "Why won't the village have you? That is not your concern. It is if you are in my house." She held his gaze. He saw her think about it. He saw her decide. She said, "My husband died at sea 2 years ago. He left debts. His brother inherited what little we had. He is not a kind man. I would not stay in a house with him after my husband was gone. I left. I have been walking since, in a manner of speaking. The village down the hill would take a woman with a child, but not this woman with this child, because the brother has written letters ahead of me. He says I stole from him. I did not. He says the child is not my husband's. She is. But he is louder than I am, and he has more friends. So I am here." She said all of this the way another woman might have listed the price of eggs. No self-pity, no embroidery, just the facts, laid out one after another, the way you lay out silverware. Callum said, "How long have you been walking?" 9 months. He looked at the child again. He said, quietly, "Where did you sleep before you came here?" "Barns, 1 church porch. Once, a graveyard. Once, in a cave for 4 days when it rained." The child said, 7. Callum turned and walked out of the kitchen. He walked down the passage. He walked back to the front hall. He stood in the front hall and stared at the candle on the table. He noticed, for the first time, that someone had polished the brass candlestick. It was not gleaming, but it was clean. He had not seen this candlestick clean in 8 years. He thought about riding away. He thought about turning around, mounting his horse, and going back to London and never seeing this house again. It was, he understood, exactly what he had done the first time. He did not do it. He walked back to the kitchen. Vivienne had knelt again beside the child. She was showing her how to line the pebbles up more evenly. She looked up when he came in. She did not stand. He said, "You may stay until I decide what to do with the house." Vivienne nodded once. "Thank you. I am not being kind," he said. "I have not decided anything. I only did not want the responsibility of a child in a hedgerow on my conscience. That is a kindness, whether you name it one or not." He did not know how to answer that. He turned to go. At the door he stopped. He said, without turning, "There is a horse outside. See that someone stables it. I do not know if there is anyone in the stable." "There is not," she said. "I will see to the horse myself. I know how." He walked out. Behind him, the child said, "8." That night, Callum could not sleep. He had taken the room that had been his as a boy. It was the smallest of the bedrooms, tucked under the eaves on the east side of the house, and it was the only room besides the kitchen where a fire had been recently lit. Vivienne, he understood, had lit it. She must have heard him come in and moved fast. She must have known he would want a bed, and this had been the easiest room to warm. The sheets on the bed were clean. Not new, but clean. They smelled faintly of lavender, the way his mother's linen closet had always smelled. He wondered where she had found lavender in November on an abandoned estate. And then he remembered the lavender bush by the kitchen door, wild now, and he understood. He lay on his back in the small bed and looked at the ceiling. The wind moved outside. The house creaked, the way old houses do. A branch scraped against the window and stopped. Scraped and stopped. Downstairs, faintly, he could hear a door close. Then footsteps. Then nothing. He thought about the woman in the kitchen. He thought about her not standing when he came in. He thought about her not apologizing. He thought about the way she had said the name of every hardship as though it were a piece of furniture in the room, part of the arrangement, nothing to be embarrassed about. He thought about the child counting pebbles. He thought about his brother. 6 months had passed here before Callum thought about his brother without turning away from the thought. His brother had been 10 years old. Callum had been 10 years old also, because they had been twins. Twins in a house of servants and quiet parents. Twins who had shared a room. Twins who had shared a horse. Twins who had shared everything until the pond froze one January morning, and one of them fell through, and the other could not pull him out in time. The pond was on the east side of the garden. Callum had not walked to that side of the garden in 8 years. He rolled over and pressed his face into the pillow. He thought, for a moment, that he could smell the bread from the kitchen still. Faintly, through 3 floors of house and 2 closed doors. He slept at last, near dawn. He came down in the morning to find breakfast on the kitchen table. A bowl of porridge, a heel of the new bread, a cup of tea. Vivienne stood at the sink with her sleeves rolled up, washing a pot. She did not turn when he came in. She said, "There is butter for the bread. It is not much. I could not buy more." He said, "Where is the child?" "Feeding the chickens." "There are chickens." 3. "I bought them in November with the last of my money. They earn their keep." She wiped her hands on a cloth and turned to him. Her sleeves were still rolled up. Her forearms were thin but hard. "Sit down, Your Grace. The porridge is getting cold." He sat down. He ate the porridge. It was plain but well salted. The bread was good. The butter, when he found it in a small crock, was clean and fresh. He said, "Whose chickens?" "Mine, until you tell me otherwise." He ate for a while without speaking. Then he said, "Why did you not sell the silver?" Vivienne turned. Her grey eyes were steady. "Because it is not mine. You could have. I could have taken it, and no one would have known. Yes, I could have sold it in the town, and there would have been enough money to take Rosalind and me anywhere in England. I could have taken us to Bristol and boarded a boat and been in Ireland by spring. Yes, I know. I have counted every piece of silver in this house at least twice. I know what it would fetch." "Then why?" She looked at him a moment longer. "Because I would not have my daughter grow up knowing her mother was a thief. I have been called many things in the last 9 months. I would rather be called them than be them. Callum set down his spoon. He said, "That is a strange sort of dignity for a woman sleeping in a strange man's house. It is the only sort I have left." She said it without heat. "You will have to make do with it, Your Grace, or ask us to leave." He did not ask them to leave. In the days that followed, he moved through the house like a stranger in a place he had once known too well. Vivienne kept to the ground floor. He heard her sometimes, cleaning or singing softly to Rosalind, or speaking to the chickens. The house was too big for her to keep it truly, but she kept the parts she used, and she kept them well. He did not enter the east wing. He did not enter the long gallery. He did not go into his father's study. He did not go near the garden on the east side of the house. On the third morning, he came down to find Vivienne on a ladder in the front hall, taking down a curtain that had rotted through in one corner. She said, "The velvet is finished. I can rework the good half into cushion covers if you like, or you may burn it. It is your curtain." He said, "Burn it." She nodded and climbed down. He watched her carry the curtain out to the yard. She was not tall. The curtain was longer than she was. She dragged it across the flagstones without complaint. When she came back in, he said, "Who taught you to mend a roof?" "My father." "He was a stonemason. And you had a stonemason for a father, and you married a sailor." "I married a good man." She said it steadily. "He was a good man. I do not want his memory turned into an argument. I meant no offense, none taken." She went back to her work. He stood in the hall a while longer, watching her sweep the plaster dust from where the curtain had been. He noticed that she moved efficiently, without wasted motion, the way people who have done hard work all their lives move. He said, without meaning to, "How old is your daughter?" "Rosalind is 5. "And her name?" "Rosalind. I told you the day you came." "I forgot." Vivienne looked up. She said, "You did not forget. You did not want to hear it." He did not answer. She went back to sweeping. The first week passed. The second week began with rain. It rained for 3 days without stopping. Callum sat in the small parlour at the back of the house, the one his mother had used, and he watched the rain drag down the windows in long silver lines. He did not know why he had chosen this room. He had told himself he would not sit in it. He had sat in it anyway. On the third afternoon of rain, Vivienne came in with a tray. She set it on the small table beside his chair. Tea, and 2 slices of bread, and a small pot of honey. She said, "The bees I kept in November. There is not much honey, but I saved a little for a bad day." He said, "This is a bad day." Yes, she did not linger. She went back out. He stared at the honey. He picked up the pot and turned it in his hands. It was a small brown crock. It had been in this house 8 years ago. He remembered it. His mother had used it for salt. He set it down. He put honey on the bread and ate it, and it tasted of clover and rain, and something older than either. Later that day he went into the library. He had not gone into the library since he had returned. It was on the east side of the house, and he had been walking past it and not looking at it, and today, for no reason he could name, he walked into it. He stopped in the doorway. The library had not been touched. Vivienne had not cleaned here. The books stood on the shelves under a fine grey fur of dust. The curtains were drawn, and the smell was of old paper and old leather and old silence. He walked in. He walked between the shelves. He ran a finger along the spines. He did not know what he was looking for. He was not looking for anything. He was walking through his own past because for the first time in 8 years he had the strength to. He came to the desk in the far corner. There was a book on the desk. A single book, closed, its cover turned up. Someone had been reading it and had set it down. He looked at the book. It was a book of botanical drawings. It was open, he realized when he lifted the cover, at a marker. The marker was a strip of blue ribbon, faded, the kind a child might tie in her hair. He turned to the page. It was a drawing of a lavender plant. He stood at the desk for a long time. Then he closed the book, and he put the ribbon back where it had been, and he walked out of the library and closed the door behind him. He did not ask Vivienne about the book that night. He did not mention it. But the next morning, he came into the kitchen and said, "Your daughter reads." Vivienne looked up from the fire. A little. Her father taught her before he sailed. I have been teaching her the rest. She was in the library. She likes the pictures. She does not tear the pages. I made her promise. If it troubles you, I will keep her out. It does not trouble me. Vivienne looked at him. She said, "Carefully, are you certain?" "Yes," she said, "thank you." He walked out. That afternoon he saw the child in the garden. She was in the front garden, not the east side, and she was sitting on the low stone wall by the drive. She had a stick in one hand, and she was pushing it through the wet gravel, making shapes. Callum stood at an upstairs window and watched her. She was very small. She was also, he understood as he watched her, alone in a large and difficult world. Her mother was inside working. Her mother was always inside working. The child had no companion but her pebbles and her stick and, occasionally, the chickens. He thought about his brother. He thought about being 10 years old and being with his brother, and how the two of them had made whole kingdoms in this garden. They had crowned each other kings with wreaths of ivy. They had fought duels with willow branches. They had made a boat out of a barrel and pushed each other in it across the pond until the day he turned from the window. That night, he could not sleep again. He went downstairs at some black hour, meaning to fetch a candle from the kitchen. He came to the ground floor, and he saw a light under the kitchen door, and he pushed it open. Vivienne was sitting at the table. Her hair was down. It fell around her shoulders in a soft, uncombed wave. She wore a shawl over her nightgown. She had a cup of tea in front of her. Untouched, she had been crying. She looked up when he came in. She did not try to hide her face. She said, quietly, "I am sorry. I did not think anyone would come down." He stood in the doorway. He did not know what to do. He said, at last, "May I sit?" She nodded. He sat across from her. For a long time neither of them spoke. The fire had burned low. The kitchen was warm but not hot. There was a smell of tea and of something else, of wood smoke that had settled into the beams over years. Outside, the rain had stopped. He could hear the drip of water from the eaves. He said, "What is wrong?" She said, "Today would have been our 7th anniversary." He said nothing. She said, "Rosalind asked me tonight if I remembered what he looked like. I said yes, but I do not. Not exactly. I remember pieces of him. I remember the sound of his laugh. I remember the way he held his cup. I do not remember his face. That is the worst part. I loved him, and I cannot bring his face back, and my daughter is going to grow up not knowing what her father looked like. And I am going to be the only one who ever saw him, and I am forgetting." She stopped. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. She did it briskly, like a woman who has had enough of tears. She said, "I am sorry. I did not mean to say all that. Do not be sorry." He said it before he thought. It came out lower than he had meant. She looked at him. He said, "I have a brother." I had a brother. He was my twin. He died when we were 10, in the pond on the east side of this garden. I could not pull him out. I have not walked on that side of the house in 8 years. I know how it is to forget the face of a person you loved. I know how it is. He stopped. He had not said these words out loud in 18 years. Vivienne looked at him a long moment. She did not say anything. She did not offer comfort. She did not try to make it smaller. She simply looked at him. Then she reached across the table, and she put her hand on his hand. For a moment only. Then she took it away. She said, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "I do not know why I did." "Yes, you do." He looked at her. He said, "Yes, I do." They sat there a while longer. Neither of them said anything more. The fire settled in the grate. Somewhere far away an owl called. The tea cooled between them. At last she stood. She said, "Good night, Your Grace." He said, "Callum, my name is Callum." She said, "Good night, Callum." She went up the back stairs. He sat there another hour before he went up the front. In the morning, everything was as it had been. Vivienne set his breakfast on the table. Rosalind fed the chickens. The house creaked. The fire cracked. Neither he nor Vivienne spoke of the night before. It was not a thing they needed to speak of. It had happened. It was in the walls of the kitchen now, part of the furniture, part of the arrangement. A week passed. The rain came and went. The roads dried. Callum began to walk the estate. He walked slowly, because the walking was more difficult than he had expected. Not the physical walking. He was strong. But every field, every stone wall, every stand of trees had a memory attached to it, and he had to stop many times, and stand and let each memory come, and let it pass. He walked the south fields. He walked the west. He walked the tenant cottages, one by one. Some were still occupied. Some were not. The ones that were, he entered, and he spoke to the families, and he apologized, without saying the word apology, for 8 years of absence. The tenants were guarded. They had reason to be. But they were not cruel. They told him what they needed. Roofs, new tools. A blacksmith closer than the next village. He wrote down every word in a small book he carried in his pocket. He did not walk the east side of the garden. Not yet. One afternoon he came back to the house muddy and cold, and Vivienne met him at the door with hot water and a clean shirt of his own that she had found and washed and pressed with a stone. She said, "You will catch your death." He said, "Thank you." She said, "There is soup." He ate the soup. That evening, Rosalind came into the small parlour where he was reading. She stood in the doorway with her hands behind her back. Her mother was elsewhere. Her mother, he realized, had let her come alone. She said, "May I sit?" He said, yes. She came in and sat in the chair opposite him. Her feet did not reach the floor. She swung them a little, then stopped, remembering to be polite. She said, "My mother says, you are sad." He did not know what to say. She said, "I am also sad sometimes, when I miss my father." He said, "I am sorry about your father." She nodded gravely. She said, "I brought you something." She brought her hands out from behind her back. She was holding a pebble, a round grey pebble, water-smooth, the kind you find in a stream bed. She held it out to him. She said, "It is a good one. It is my best one. When I am sad, I hold it and count to 10, and I feel a little better. You can have it. It works." He took the pebble. It was warm from her small hand. He said, "Thank you." She said, "You have to count to 10, though. You have to count all the way. If you stop at 5, it does not work." He said, "I will count all the way." She nodded. Then she slid down from the chair and walked out of the room. He sat for a long time with the pebble in his palm. He was 34 years old. He was the Duke of Ashworth. He had been given the pebble by a 5-year-old child whose father was dead and whose mother was living in his kitchen without permission, and he understood, sitting there in his mother's chair with the pebble warm in his hand, that he had not been given a gift like this in 18 years. He closed his hand around it. He counted to 10. He did feel a little better. The next morning he went to the village. He rode down alone. The village was 2 miles at the foot of the hill. He had not been to it since his return, and the villagers had not known he was back, though they had guessed from the smoke on the hill. He went to the inn first, and then to the church, and then to the small house where the magistrate lived. At each of these 3 places, he did the same thing. He asked one question, and he listened to the answer. The question was, "Have you had any letters, in the last year, from a man named Marsh, concerning a woman and a child?" At the inn, the innkeeper's wife looked shifty and said no, and Callum knew she was lying. At the church, the vicar, an old man with kind eyes, said yes. He said the letters had been many. He said the man wrote often, and the letters were full of accusations, and the vicar had not believed them, but he had also not known what to do. At the magistrate's house, the magistrate himself brought out a file. In the file were 4 letters. Callum read them. They were terrible letters. They said Vivian Marsh had stolen jewellery from her dead husband's brother. They said the child was not her husband's, that she had lain with a sailor from another ship. They said she was known to be a woman of low character, and any village that took her in would suffer for it. Callum read every letter twice. He said, to the magistrate, "May I keep these?" The magistrate said, "Your Grace, I am not sure that is." Callum said, "I will pay you for them. Whatever price you name." The magistrate named a price. Callum paid it. He put the letters in his coat. He rode back up the hill. He did not tell Vivienne about the letters. He did not tell her he had gone to the village. He put the letters in a locked drawer in his father's study, which was the first time he had entered that room since coming home, and he closed the drawer and he walked out. He wrote a letter of his own. He wrote it that night by candlelight. He wrote it to a lawyer in London whom his family had used for 40 years. He described what he had read in the letters from the village, and he described what he wanted done. He wanted the brother-in-law investigated. He wanted the debts examined. He wanted to know whether the accusations against Vivian Marsh had any basis in law or in fact, and he wanted to know what could be done to end them. He sealed the letter and gave it to a boy from the village to take to the post the next morning. He did not mention it to Vivienne. He was not doing it for her thanks. The days grew warmer. Vivienne began to open the shutters on the ground floor rooms one by one. She did it slowly. She did not ask permission. She would open a shutter on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday morning Callum would come down and find sunlight in a room he had not seen sunlight in for 8 years, and he would say nothing. On Thursday she would open another. By the end of April, the whole ground floor of the house was letting in light. The house did not yet look like it had been lived in. It looked like it was waking up. Callum began to spend his evenings in the library. He would go in after dinner and sit at the desk in the corner and go through the estate papers. There were years of them, letters from stewards and tenants and lawyers that had piled up on the desk in his absence. He read every one. He answered every one that could still be answered. Some evenings he was there until midnight. Rosalind would come in and sit on the rug by the window with her book of botanical drawings. She would turn the pages carefully, one at a time, and sometimes she would ask him what a word meant, and he would tell her, and she would go back to turning pages. Vivienne sometimes came in and sat by the fire with her mending. None of them talked much, but it did not feel like the silence of strangers. One evening, when Rosalind had gone to bed, and only Vivienne and Callum were left in the library, Vivienne said, without looking up from her mending, "You have been kinder than I expected." Callum said, "You have been quieter than I expected." She smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. Her mouth was wide, and the smile pulled it wider, and it made her whole face look younger. She said, "You do not know how quiet I can be." He said, "I am beginning to." He looked at her a moment. She looked back at him. The moment held. Then a log settled in the grate, and the moment passed, and neither of them said anything more about it. The reply from the London lawyer came in the middle of May. Callum read it in his father's study with the door closed. The lawyer had done the work. The lawyer had found the truth. Ronan Marsh, the brother-in-law, was a swindler. He had not only taken his brother's property, he had taken money from 3 other families in the same way, and there was more than enough evidence to have him charged. Furthermore, the debts he claimed against Vivienne's dead husband were forged. The signatures were the brother's own. The lawyer had already begun proceedings. The lawyer's advice was clear. If Callum was willing to fund the case to its end, the brother would be ruined, and Vivienne would be free of him within 4 months. Her name would be cleared. The letters would be discredited. She could live openly in any village in England. Callum wrote back that same night. He told the lawyer to proceed. He told the lawyer to spare no cost. He told the lawyer not to write him again until the matter was settled, and not to speak Vivienne's name to anyone but himself. He sealed the letter. He walked out of the study. He did not tell Vivienne. Not yet. June came. The garden began to bloom. Vivienne had done nothing to it since November, and the wildness was full and strange. Roses growing through the untrimmed hedges, and old lavender bushes flowering along the paths. The bees came back. One warm afternoon, Callum walked to the east side of the garden. He did it without deciding to. He had gone out for a walk after breakfast, and his feet had turned, and he had followed his feet, and then he was standing at the low iron gate that led to the east lawn. And beyond the east lawn was the pond. He put his hand on the gate. He stood there a long time. He had not stood on this ground since he was 10 years old. He had walked away from it on a January day with his brother's body in a blanket, and he had never come back. He had promised himself he would never come back. He was 34 years old. He had promised himself many things when he was 10. He opened the gate. He walked through. The lawn was overgrown. The path to the pond was almost gone under the grass. He walked slowly. His boots made a soft, wet sound in the long grass. The air smelled of clover and warm earth. A bee moved past his ear. He came to the pond. It was smaller than he remembered. Everything from childhood is smaller when you come back to it. But he had not been ready for this. He had spent 18 years remembering a black frozen sea. What he found was a still pool the size of a farmhouse kitchen, ringed with reeds, dragonflies moving over the surface. He stood at the edge. He did not cry. He had thought he might. He did not. He said out loud, "I am sorry." There was no one to hear him but the dragonflies. He said it again. "I am sorry, brother. I could not pull you out." The pond made no answer, because a pond does not answer, but he had not expected it to. He stood there for a long time. When he turned to go back, Vivienne was there. She was standing at the iron gate. She had a basket of laundry on her hip. She must have come out to hang it and seen him from the yard. She did not come closer. She stayed at the gate. He walked back to her slowly. When he was near enough, she said, "You went to the pond." He said, "Yes." She said, "I am glad." He said, "So am I." They walked back to the house together. Neither of them said anything else. She hung her washing. He went inside. That evening at supper, Rosalind said, without preamble, "The chickens like you now." Callum said, "Do they? The brown one especially. She followed you across the yard yesterday." I did not notice. She noticed. Vivienne, at the other side of the table, hid a smile in her cup. Later, when Rosalind was in bed, Vivienne said, "She is very taken with you." Callum said, "I do not know why. I have hardly spoken to her. You listen to her. It is not the same as speaking. Not many people listen to a 5-year-old girl. She notices." Callum looked down at his plate. He said, "She gave me a pebble." "Yes, I know." "Do you?" "She told me. It was her best one." He said, quietly, "I keep it in my pocket." Vivienne did not answer at once. Then she said, "That is a good thing to do." He said Vivienne. It was the first time he had said her name. She looked up. He said, "I have to tell you something." She waited. He said, "I wrote to a lawyer in London, weeks ago, about your brother-in-law, about the letters he has been sending. I have his letters. I paid for them from the magistrate. I have had them read and traced and answered." She had gone very still. He said, "The lawyer has proof. Your brother-in-law is a swindler. He forged the debts. He has done this to other families. He will be prosecuted. Your name will be cleared. Within 4 months, most likely. Perhaps sooner." She did not speak. He said, "I did not tell you before because I did not want you to hope, in case it did not come to anything. And I did not tell you before because I did not want you to think you owed me anything. You do not owe me anything." She said, "At last, why did you do this?" He said, "Because it was the right thing to do. That is not the whole reason." He looked at her. He said, "No, it is not." The candle guttered on the table between them. The kitchen was warm. The fire had burned low. From somewhere upstairs, Rosalind coughed once in her sleep, then quieted. Vivienne said, softly, "Say the rest." He said, Because I did not want you to have to leave." She said nothing. He said, "That is all. I do not ask anything of you. I ask nothing. But I did not want you to have to leave, and I could do something about it, so I did." She looked at him a long time. She said, "Thank you." He nodded. She said, "Callum." He said, "Yes." She said, "I have to tell you something also." He waited. She said, "The reason I chose this house. When I was walking with Rosalind in November. There are many empty houses in England. I could have gone anywhere. But I came here because I remembered a story my father told me when I was a girl. He worked on this estate when he was young, before he moved to the coast. He worked on the wall of the east garden, the one by the pond. He knew your father a little. He said your father was a hard man, but a fair one. He said this house had good people in it. He said if I was ever in trouble, if I ever needed a place to hide, this was the house I should go to." Callum said, "But my father was dead when you came, and I had been gone 8 years. She said, "I know. I did not know that when I chose the house. I only knew what my father had told me. When I got here and saw the place shuttered, I thought, this is God's answer, an empty house that once belonged to good people. So I stayed." She looked at him. She said, "I did not know you would come home. I did not know anyone would come home. When I heard the horse on the drive that first morning, I thought, this is where it ends. He will send us away." Callum said, "I nearly did. I know. I am glad I did not. I know that also." They sat there. He said, "May I ask you something? Yes, when your husband died, when you had to leave, were you ever ashamed of any of it?" She thought about it. She said, "I was ashamed of asking for help when I had to. I was never ashamed of being poor. There is a difference." He said, "Yes, there is." She said, "Why did you ask?" He said, "Because I have been ashamed for 18 years of things that were not my fault, and I am beginning to see that I have wasted a great deal of time." She looked at him. She reached across the table. She put her hand on his hand. This time, she did not take it away. She said, "You are not wasting time now." He said no. They sat that way for a long time. The lawyer's news came in September. It came exactly as promised. The brother-in-law was arrested. The letters were withdrawn. Vivienne's name was cleared through the county, and the village at the foot of the hill sent a formal apology, which Vivienne accepted without expression. She did not move down to the village. She did not need to. Callum had by then made a proposal, and she had by then accepted. And there was a small wedding in the country church at the edge of the estate on the last Saturday in September. Rosalind was flower girl. She wore a white dress and she carried lavender from the garden. She counted the pews as she walked up the aisle, whispering to herself. 1, 2, 3. She stopped at 10. She had learned that 10 was enough. Callum stood at the altar. He was not smiling widely. It was not his way. But there was a quiet in his face that had not been there before, and the vicar, who had known him as a boy, saw it and understood. Vivienne walked up the aisle without a father to give her away. She had asked to walk alone. She wore a grey dress, because grey was what she had, and she carried a single sprig of the same lavender Rosalind had carried, because she had loved it since her father first told her about it. She reached the altar. Callum took her hand. He said, quietly, so only she could hear, "Welcome home." She said, "I have been home for months." He said, "I know, but now I can say it out loud." The vicar cleared his throat. They turned to be married. The house was not fully restored even a year after that. The east wing was still closed. The stables needed more work than one man and a woman and a child could manage. The gardens had been tamed only in patches. But the ground floor had light in every window. The bell had been replaced over the front door. The gates at the bottom of the drive were mended. The path to the pond had been cleared and edged with white stones. And a small bench had been built at the water's edge, where Callum sometimes sat in the evenings, alone, remembering his brother without pain now, only with love. Vivienne would sometimes join him there. She never spoke first. She would sit beside him on the bench, and she would put her hand on his hand, and they would watch the dragonflies together until the light failed. One evening in early October of that first year, they were on the bench together. Rosalind was in the house, being taught by the new tutor Callum had hired from the village. The chickens were shut in for the night. The lavender was going out of bloom. Vivienne said, "You never asked me, that first day, what I would have done if you had thrown us out." Callum said, "No, I did not. I would have walked back down the hill." "To where?" "To wherever the road went." He said, "I am glad I did not throw you out." She said, "So am I." He said, "I owe you an odd thing. What, when I came home that first morning, I did not think this house could ever be a house again. I thought it was over. I thought I would come home for a week, put affairs in order, and leave forever. Sell what I could. Let the rest rot. I had made peace, of a sort, with the idea that this place would die with me." He looked at her. He said, "Instead I found you in the kitchen, and a child on the floor with pebbles, and a fire in the grate, and bread in the oven, and the whole place already turning, without me, back toward life. I did not save this house. You did. I only came home in time to see it saved." Vivienne said, "That is not how I remember it. How do you remember it?" She said, "I remember a man in the doorway of my kitchen who was so lonely I could see it in the way he held his hands. I remember thinking, if this man throws us out, he will not survive the winter alone in this house. He will die of his own quiet. And so I stayed, partly for Rosalind, and partly because I thought he needed us as much as we needed him. I only did not know how much until later." Callum said, "I did need you. I know. I need you still. I know." He said, "I love you." She said, "I know that too." She turned to him and put both her hands on his face. Her hands were warm. She looked at him a long time. She said, "I love you, Callum Ash. I have loved you since the night in the kitchen when you told me about your brother. I did not know until then. But when you said it, I knew." He said, "It took me longer than that. When did you know?" "When your daughter gave me the pebble." Vivienne laughed. It was a soft laugh, low in her throat. She said, "That is a good thing to know a person by." He said, "It is the truest thing I know." They sat there on the bench, in the last of the light, and the dragonflies were fewer now, and the pond was very still, and somewhere in the house behind them a child was reading her mother's book of botanical drawings, and the smoke was rising from the kitchen chimney, and the house on the hill, which for 8 years had turned its back on the world, was facing forward again. The house was not fixed, not all the way. There were still rooms Callum had not opened. There were still fields that needed mending. There were still years of work ahead. He was not the man he had been at 10, and he never would be, and he did not need to be. But he was home, and the house knew it. He rose from the bench. He held out his hand. Vivienne took it. They walked back through the long grass to the house, and Rosalind came running out to meet them, holding a picture she had drawn of the 3 of them and the chickens, and behind her the door of the kitchen stood open, and inside, on the table, in a small brown crock, there was honey saved from spring for a good day. It was a good day. They went inside. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.